They say there was a night when the sky forgot its colour, when the stars blurred and the world looked up to see a second sun blooming in silence. Before history began, before language could write fear into stone, something happened, something so immense that its memory refused to die. It sank into our myths instead, wearing the faces of angry gods, burning serpents, and rivers of fire falling from heaven. The Sumerians spoke of storms that devoured empires. The Hopi told of a red star that cleansed the world. In every direction, across every ancient shore, stories begin with the same trembling sky. We call them legends. Yet, legends are simply memories too old to name. When the old storytellers whispered of fire and flood, were they not describing what their ancestors saw? Entire mountains trembling, oceans boiling under a sun that was no longer kind, a planet staggering under something it could not explain. The flood myths of the world, from the Hebrew deluge to the tales of Manu in India, sound less like fantasy and more like eyewitness accounts passed down in the only language they knew, metaphor. It's easier to blame the gods than to face the idea that the sky itself once turned against them. Imagine standing beneath that sky. You hear a sound like a mountain cracking open. A blinding arc streaks across the horizon, trailing light like a wound. Then, silence followed by waves that swallow the edges of the world. The people who survived would have thought the heavens had fallen. To them, it must have seemed like the end of time. But time didn't end. It reset. What we call civilization may only be the second draft of humanity's story. Before our recorded past, before Egypt, before Sumer, there might have been another age, one erased so thoroughly that only its warnings survived. The echoes of that night are hidden in the oldest carvings, spirals, suns, and serpents that seem to dance between stars. Ancient texts speak of days that lasted too long, of darkness at noon, of fire that reigned for weeks. They do not describe chaos abstractly. They describe it as if they had seen it, felt it, endured it. It's tempting to dismiss these tales as imagination. Yet, they all describe the same sequence: fire, flood, and silence. The same pattern across oceans that never met. Could all of them have invented the same lie? Or were they trying to remember the same truth? What if every flood myth on Earth isn't a metaphor, but a memory? Modern science tells us that cosmic debris occasionally grazes our world. It tells us that solar storms, volcanic winters, and shifting poles have shaped life in ways we're only beginning to understand. Still, something in these stories feels older than geology, as though the planet itself once screamed, and the echo reached us through myth. When you read of fiery chariots and thunder gods, you might be reading the world's first attempt to explain impact fire, shock waves, and falling stars. Myths were not born from ignorance. They were born from survival. There is a strange comfort in thinking that the sky above us is constant, that the same stars watched over our ancestors. But what if that comfort is an illusion? What if the heavens they knew were not the heavens we see now? Imagine an ancient world struck by something vast, an object from space or a chain of eruptions that turned continents into dust. Imagine watching your gods die in fire, and knowing your children would one day forget why. The survivors would have rebuilt, carrying fragments of that terror in stories that became religion, in rituals that remembered the shape of the catastrophe even when its name was lost. And so, beneath the quiet of our modern skies, humanity dreams of floods and fire. Somewhere deep in our blood we remember. We build cities on river mouths and call them eternal. We carve towers that reach for the clouds, trusting the heavens once more. But the old tales murmur that the sky has burned before and that it will burn again. The world above us may look calm tonight, yet even calm skies can lie. For beneath their stillness, there are warnings written in light waiting for those who remember to look up. Beneath our feet, the earth keeps its own archives, not carved in stone tablets or sealed in scrolls, but pressed in the silence of soil. Layers of time lie stacked one over another, each a thin memory of a world that was. When archaeologists dig beneath ruined temples, they sometimes find more than pottery and bones. They find darkness, a black band, thin as a finger, stretching across continents, charred soil, fused glass, traces of a fire that no local myth could explain. It appears in Egypt, in Turkey, in the plains of North America, in caves, in floodplains, in forgotten burial mounds. a shared scar running through the Earth as if the whole planet had been marked by a single simultaneous wound. Scientists call it the black mat. To the untrained eye, it's nothing a layer of burnt sediment. But under microscopes, it glitters faintly. Tiny glass beads, shocked quartz, microscopic diamonds, formed only under unimaginable heat. The kind no volcano or wildfire can make. Something else did this. As the camera of imagination moves closer, we see hands brushing away dust from ancient floors. A trowel taps against stone. The earth exhales secrets that were never meant to be buried. The layer smells faintly of ash and iron, the ghost of something that once burned sky and ground together. When samples are taken to laboratories, the pattern repeats. Soot, carbon, and iridium, scattered across sites separated by oceans. Each test whispers the same improbable story that fire once fell globally. Beneath temples and deserts lies a black line, a silent witness to something the world has tried to forget. It connects ruins that never knew each other. It tells of an age when everything burned at once. What caused it? No one agrees. Some say comets, others supervolcanoes. Some whisper of solar fury, a storm so immense that it turned the air to flame. But whatever it was, it left fingerprints everywhere. Imagine standing where an archaeologist kneels today, dust drifting in a shaft of afternoon light. Beneath the soles of your shoes lies a story written in ashes. Above, birds trace lazy circles in a sky that once glowed red. You feel a strange disquiet, not fear, but recognition, as though your body remembers something your mind cannot. Perhaps that's why flood myths and fire gods linger, because the evidence lives not only in soil, but in the quiet dread that has followed humanity ever since. Every new discovery deepens the unease. The same carbon-rich strata appear in ancient lake beds, in polar ice, even inside stalagmites' nature's slow journals. They tell of abrupt endings, of forests that vanished, of seas that swallowed entire coasts. The timeline is blurred, but the rhythm is unmistakable. Fire, flood, silence, rebirth. Again and again. And now, when satellites scan the Earth's crust, they find even more anomalies, craters buried under ice, shock patterns in the desert floor, magnetic distortions that hint at forgotten impacts. The planet has been scarred, healed, and scarred again. The black layer is only the surface of a deeper memory, a heartbeat trapped in stone. It is strange how silence can scream louder than any myth, how a few centimeters of burnt earth can tell of a night when continents trembled. Yet here it is, quiet, undeniable, patient. Proof that beneath the calm fields and shining cities of our age lies the same sleeping wound, the same reminder, and from those buried scars, a new clue emerges, not in fire this time, but in ice. Deep in the frozen heart of the world, another kind of record waits, older and colder than any ruin. Far to the north, where the air itself feels ancient, the world keeps its oldest memories locked in blue silence. Beneath miles of frozen weight, time stands still. The ice does not forget, it waits. Each snowfall presses the story of a season into its depths, layers upon layers, year after year, until thousands of winters form a single cold book. When scientists drill deep into that stillness, they are not piercing ice. They are opening a vault of forgotten skies. From the frozen cores of Greenland and Antarctica, samples rise like crystal scrolls. Inside them, bubbles of ancient air whisper of worlds that breathe differently. The deeper the core, the stranger the story becomes. In one section, the ice darkens, faintly flecks of soot where there should be only white. Farther down, the chemical balance changes abruptly. Levels of carbon spike, oxygen dips, and a thin band of microscopic ash cuts through the timeline like a scar. It marks a moment when the Earth inhaled smoke from everywhere at once. Under microscopes, the particles glitter like dust from another planet. Traces of platinum and iridium metals born in cosmic fire appear in layers dated to 12 or 13,000 years ago. At that same point, pollen counts crash, signaling a sudden death of forests. Temperatures drop in a heartbeat. Mammoths vanish. Glaciers surge. Something had struck, or erupted, or torn through the sky, leaving the planet to shiver under a long night. No single cause fits neatly. The data speak in riddles. A sudden heat, then deep cold, a spike of dust, then centuries of silence. Yet together they paint a haunting picture of catastrophe, a global shiver that reshaped everything alive. The scientists describe it in measured terms, calling it the Younger Dryas cooling, the boundary event, the anomaly. But to those who dream of the old stories, these sterile words sound familiar. They sound like the sky that burned. Imagine the quiet of that moment. Snow drifting over a ruined world, settling on forests that would never rise again. The survivors huddling beneath strange constellations, watching a red sun dim behind a veil of dust. To them, it must have felt like punishment. But the ice does not judge, it only remembers. Even now, when researchers hold a sliver of that frozen record to the light, they can see the ghosts of ancient fires trapped within. Tiny soot grains shimmer as the core thaws, releasing the breath of a world reborn from ash. It's easy to think of ice as lifeless, but inside those frozen layers lies a pulse. Isotopes shift, gases murmur, revealing rhythms of extinction and renewal. Every few millennia, the pattern repeats. Warmth, upheaval, freeze, awakening. The planet moves in cycles, not lines. What we call disasters may only be the planet breathing in its sleep. Still, that thought brings little comfort, because the rhythm that once silenced entire species has not stopped. It only waits for its next verse. When the ice speaks, it does not shout. It hums softly through data, through patterns in the cores, through whispers of temperature and dust. Its message is older than writing, older than myth. It tells us that the legends of fire and flood are not inventions of frightened minds. They are recollections, frozen records of a night the world itself nearly forgot. And as the ice melts, those memories return to the sea, flowing once again beneath the same stars that watched it happen. Perhaps that is why we are drawn to these stories. Somewhere deep inside, we sense the truth beneath their poetry. The ice remembers, even when we do not. And as its frozen pages thaw in our warming age, they remind us that every end leaves traces that the next chapter of Earth's story may already be forming, quietly, beneath our feet. If you could strip away the oceans, peel back the forests, and melt the glaciers until only the bones of the planet remained, you would see that the Earth is not smooth. It is dented, bruised, scarred. From orbit, these marks look like ancient fingerprints, pressed into stone vast circles and half-buried depressions that stretch for miles. Most people never notice them, hidden beneath jungles, buried under centuries of sediment, or swallowed by ice. Yet, together they tell a story far older and stranger than any human chronicle. In the deserts of Africa, one such mark gleams like a great eye, the Richat structure, perfectly round and eerily symmetrical. In Canada, the Manicouagan crater forms a shimmering ring lake large enough to be seen from space. Under the frozen wastelands of Greenland, radar surveys have revealed another, still sharper imprint. A basin more than 30 kilometers wide, concealed beneath 2 kilometers of ice. Scientists debate whether it came from a comet or an asteroid, but the evidence is unmistakable. Something from beyond the Earth struck with unthinkable force. These wounds are not isolated. They dot the planet like a constellation drawn in stone. Some are known, mapped, explained. Others are half-vanished ghosts, only visible through satellite imaging. In the jungles of South America, perfect circular depressions appear where no volcano ever existed. Off the coast of Madagascar, the seafloor bulges in ways that defy conventional geology. And beneath the sands of Egypt, buried beneath thousands of years of wind, lies another faint circle that some say was once molten glass. We are told that impacts of this scale are rare, that millions of years separate each event. But the Earth's face seems to tell a different story, one of clustered trauma, as if several blows once fell in quick succession. What if these craters are not separate accidents, but fragments of a single cosmic assault? A swarm of celestial debris tearing through the atmosphere, raining fire on a living world. If so, then humanity's oldest stories, the fire in the heavens, the floods, the great dying, might not be myths at all, but the echo of those falling stars. It is unsettling to imagine the Earth as prey, to picture the sky as a predator capable of striking without warning. Yet the evidence lingers. Shocked quartz, glassy spherules, rare metals fused by heat beyond comprehension. Across continents, the same markers appear, as though the same hand signed its name into the crust over and over. The Earth still bears the fingerprints of something that fell from the stars. Archaeologists once believed that human civilization emerged during a time of peace. Gentle climates, fertile valleys, predictable seasons. But new data suggest otherwise. Around 12,000 years ago, as ice sheets melted and seas surged, countless cultures collapsed at once. The Clovis hunters vanished in North America. Settlements in the Near East were abandoned. Megafauna died as if by coordinated design. Could multiple impacts have struck within a narrow span of years, shattering ecosystems and reshaping the world overnight? If so, the survivors would have been forced to start again, piecing together life from the embers. The ancient myths of fire raining from heaven would not be fantasy. They would be memory, a warning carved into consciousness itself. And though time has buried the evidence beneath soil and sea, the planet still carries the record in silence, waiting for us to notice. Perhaps that is what we are beginning to do now, to read the planet's scars as the true archives of our species. Every crater a chapter, every fracture a word written in stone. Together, they form a story older than writing and more precise than myth, a story of impact, extinction, and survival. And as the satellites sweep their endless orbits, scanning ice and ocean for hidden shapes, they reveal what the ancients might already have known, that beneath every calm horizon lies a history of fire. Beneath the waves, silence replaces dust. The sea, for all its beauty, is a thief of memory. It hides what it consumes, wrapping whole worlds in its cold embrace. But sometimes, when the currents shift and light pierces the depths just right, the ghosts of old cities flicker into view. Columns, stairways, fragments of walls that once framed laughter and language, now lying in perfect stillness beneath the tides. Off the coast of Japan, divers discovered Yonaguni terraces carved in stone, steps descending into shadow, walls that seem too precise to be natural. Some say it is geology shaped by the sea, others swear it is the work of hands that no longer exist. The debate changes nothing. The structure remains, quietly defiant against time. In the Gulf of Kamphat in India, sonar scans reveal symmetrical ruins, 12 miles offshore, roads, foundations, and the outline of a settlement older than any city on record. When samples from the site were dated, they pointed to an age before the known birth of civilization. That single fact unsettled everything. The Mediterranean tells a similar story. Off the coast of Egypt, the lost city of Heracleion sleeps beneath the silt, its colossal statues still upright, its streets preserved like a dream frozen mid-breath. Near Greece, Pavlopetri lies submerged, but unmistakably human houses, courtyards, avenues swallowed whole. And on the other side of the world, in the Caribbean, fishermen have long whispered about stone patterns beneath the waves that seem too ordered to ignore. Each discovery repeats the same quiet message. Once, the water was not here. It's comforting to imagine that human history begins where textbooks say it does, with Mesopotamia's first scribes or Egypt's early kings. But the sea seems to remember differently. It remembers a time when coastlines stretched farther, when cities flourished on plains that are now seabeds. When the last ice age ended and the oceans rose, the world redrew its own map. Millions of square miles of habitable land vanished. Whatever lived there, whatever stories those people told, now rests under 100 meters of salt water. Mainstream archaeology proceeds cautiously, as it must. Claims of antediluvian civilizations sound too much like myth, too close to forbidden territory. But hesitation cannot silence what lies beneath. The evidence glows on sonar screens, speaks through the precise angles of sunken architecture, whispers through coral-covered blocks that once framed doorways. These ruins do not demand belief. They ask only to be seen. The tension between what we are told and what we can see has never been sharper. If entire cities once stood where waves now roll, then the story of humanity is incomplete. Perhaps our ancestors built, lost, and rebuilt more than once. Perhaps progress is not a straight ascent but a cycle, a rhythm of creation and forgetting. When the camera of imagination drifts above these drowned cities, a strange feeling rises, half wonder, half mourning. The streets are empty, yet they feel expectant, as though they are waiting for someone to return. The stones seem to murmur, "We were here before the flood," and maybe, in a sense, they still are. Their memory moves with the tides, their outlines shift in the currents, but their message endures. That civilizations can vanish overnight. that even greatness can be erased with a single breath of water. And above those silent ruins, we keep building, higher and closer to the edge, as though daring the sea to remember again. When the fires faded and the waters withdrew, not everyone was gone. Scattered across the mountains, hidden in valleys and caves, small groups of survivors watched the world turn quiet again. The air hung heavy with dust, the sun dimmed to a red coin. Every breath tasted of smoke and salt. Yet in that silence, life began again, slow, fragile, determined. From the edges of extinction, humanity stirred. These survivors carried no books, no monuments, only memory. Around their fires they whispered the stories that kept them alive. Of the sky that had burned, of the days when rivers swallowed the earth, of the few who found shelter before the storm. To their children these tales became sacred. Over generations they transformed into myths of gods and punishments, into parables of cycles and rebirth. But buried within their poetry was truth, an echo of the cataclysm they had seen. Tribes scattered across continents share strange similarities in their oldest stories. The Hopi speak of worlds destroyed by fire and flood, each reborn through the courage of a few who remembered the old ways. In the mountains of Bolivia, the Aymara tell of a sun that vanished for days before returning in fury. Far away, in the cold reaches of Siberia, the Evenki remember a thunder from the heavens that flattened forests and scorched the land. None of these cultures could have met. Yet their voices rhyme, as though singing from a shared memory buried in the human heart. Archaeologists often dismiss oral traditions as embellishment, but sometimes memory is more resilient than stone. When modern researchers map these legends, a pattern emerges. The places where the stories originate often align with sites of ancient trauma, craters, floodplains, volcanic scars. The storytellers were not inventing wonders, they were passing on warnings, and across generations, those warnings became the first threads of religion, astronomy, and art. Among these fragments, some tribes preserved star maps that predate known navigation. They speak of constellations that once rose in different places, of celestial paths that no longer exist. In the Australian desert, the Walpiri recount how the sky once cracked open, raining fire that carved the land into the shapes we see today. Their songlines trace those scars perfectly, as if memory itself had mapped the catastrophe. It is tempting to imagine these people as primitives, clinging to superstition, yet perhaps they were the true historians, custodians of an event too vast for language. In their rituals of fire and renewal, in their dances mimicking falling stars, they preserved what mattered most, the knowledge that destruction is never final, and survival is an act of remembrance. Picture a lone group beneath an ash-grey dawn. They watch the sun struggle to rise, carrying only what they can remember. They do not know if anyone else is alive, only that they must begin again. So they build small fires, craft tools, sing to the stars, and mark the seasons by the slow return of green. In doing so, they plant the seeds of the next age. Every myth that survives today, every flood, every rebirth, every hero carrying fire through darkness, may trace its lineage to those moments of fragile endurance. They didn't vanish. They adapted. They remembered. And through that remembering, they shaped us. The modern world, with its cities and satellites, stands on the bones of those who once stared into a sky of flame. Every act of creation we perform, every temple raised, every story told is a quiet defiance against forgetting. The survivors of the ash sky are still speaking, not through words, but through us. And somewhere in those old fireside tales lies a question that refuses to fade. What if their warnings weren't only about the past, but the future? Across the deserts and highlands of the world, immense stones stand as if frozen mid-sentence. Their edges whisper precision, their placement defies coincidence. Göbekli Tepe rises from the dust of Turkey, like the memory of a forgotten world, pillars older than writing, older than agriculture, older than what we call civilization itself. Each column carved with animals that no longer roam those plains, each arranged in perfect celestial symmetry. Archaeologists tell us it was built by hunter-gatherers, but how do hunters measure the stars? How do nomads carve 12-ton monoliths and place them with mathematical grace? Thousands of miles away, at the edge of the Bolivian Altiplano, lies Puma Punku, its stones shaped with a precision that rivals modern engineering. Granite blocks sliced with right angles so exact, that light passes through their seams without resistance. Some weigh more than a locomotive, yet they interlock like pieces of a machine. The site's fragments lie scattered now, as though some vast force once tore it apart. Mainstream explanations call it coincidence, erosion, or the work of later builders imitating an older style. But the marks of the tools, the patterns of the joints, tell a quieter story that whoever built this understood something we have forgotten. From Egypt to Peru, from Stonehenge to Angkor, the same fingerprints appear: alignments to solstices, lunar cycles, and the slow precession of the equinoxes. These are not random ornaments of stone, they are equations carved into earth. To study them is to see a kind of message system, a language written for those who would one day rediscover the sky. It is as if these sites were never meant to honor gods but to preserve knowledge, to anchor wisdom against the tides of forgetting. What if the stones were not meant to impress the gods but to warn us? When we stand before these monuments, we are not looking at temples, we are looking at instruments. Some track the seasons, others mark cosmic events invisible to the naked eye. The builders mapped eclipses, recorded star paths, and etched patterns that match constellations visible only during epochs long past. They were not building for themselves, they were building for time. There is a strange calm in realizing that the ground beneath us has been measured and remeasured by civilizations erased from memory. It humbles our arrogance, reminding us that we are not the first to lift our eyes to the heavens and seek meaning there. And perhaps that was the point, to leave something that would survive the next flood, the next fire, the next silence. Each site feels like a coded testimony, a whisper passed forward through the centuries. Remember the sky, remember the cycles, remember how to begin again. Their creators might have watched their own world fall and chosen to preserve not wealth or lineage, but knowledge, geometry, astronomy, and alignment, the language of the cosmos itself. It is easy to see the stones as relics, but what if they are more like blueprints? What if they describe how to rebuild after catastrophe, how to reconnect the earth to the rhythm of the stars? Beneath the weight of myth and erosion, these monuments may hold the memory of survival. Tonight, when we imagine those ancient builders, we see hands pressing into dust, eyes turned skyward, hearts heavy with the knowledge that everything can vanish. And perhaps that knowledge was their gift, a message carved in rock, waiting for a future civilization to finally listen. And as we begin to read their code, we start to see something else. A map stretching across the world, connecting these monuments by the constellations themselves, as though the earth once spoke the same language everywhere. There are maps that should not exist. Faded lines on vellum and skin, drawn centuries before satellites, showing coasts that no one of their age could have seen. The most famous rests in an Istanbul archive, the Piri Reis map. Created in 1513, it charts parts of South America with uncanny accuracy, but the real puzzle lies far to the south. There, beyond the tip of the continent, it sketches a vast white landmass, a coastline that mirrors Antarctica. Yet Antarctica was not officially discovered for another 300 years, and beneath its ice, that precise outline has only recently been confirmed by radar. How could someone map what they were never meant to see? Piri Reis himself claimed he copied older charts, fragments of knowledge gathered from the ancients. He was a navigator, not a dreamer. His notes mention sources that came from long-dead empires, maps older than memory. The more scholars compared them, the stranger it became. Some of these early charts display an understanding of longitude that should have been impossible without modern instruments. Others trace river systems buried under miles of ice. If true, it would mean whoever first drew them saw the Earth as it was before the last glaciation. It is tempting to call it coincidence, a fluke of artistry or imagination. Yet other examples keep surfacing: the Orontius Phineas map, the Boache chart, fragments from Alexandria and Baghdad that seem to share a single parent source. They depict a world both familiar and lost. Coastlines smoother, mountain ranges free of snow, islands that have since drowned. The accuracy defies explanation. It hints that someone once possessed a knowledge of the planet's true form, knowledge carried forward through Cataclysm and copied until its origin was forgotten. If the great monuments were blueprints in stone, these charts may have been their paper counterparts, guides for survivors, markers for the world that had been. Imagine a people watching their continents sink, desperate to preserve memory before the waters rose. They record what they can, trusting that one day, when the world calms, others will find their work and understand. Generations later, those fragments reappear in the hands of sailors and scholars who believe they are discovering the Earth anew. There is something haunting about that thought that every age believes itself to be the first, while it may simply be the latest to awaken from forgetting. The maps do not scream their message, they whisper. They suggest a lineage of cartographers who knew the shape of a vanished planet and refused to let it die completely. Each rediscovery challenges the timeline we accept. Perhaps the ancients were not primitive after all, but custodians of an inheritance older than civilization itself. Perhaps they were survivors of a world erased, passing on what little they could through ink and stone. And if such precise knowledge could outlive its makers once, could it happen again? Could our own age, should it fall, leave behind traces that another world will struggle to interpret, wondering how we saw what we were never meant to see? History moves like a tide. It advances, retreats, and returns again to the same silent shores. Civilizations rise, believing themselves eternal, and then vanish as though swallowed by sleep. The Earth has watched this pattern for longer than memory, each cycle leaving faint echoes, broken walls, scattered bones, stories carved into the dark. When we look back across millennia, what we call progress begins to look like repetition. The same climb, the same fall, the same forgetting. After the Ice Age ended, warmth returned, and humanity bloomed again. New rivers fed the plains, and from their banks rose the first known cities. Sumer, Egypt, the Indus, each building higher than the last. Yet within each golden age, shadows gathered: drought, flood, invasion, silence. The Bronze Age collapsed almost overnight. Great empires fell to ruin, their writing lost, their gods abandoned. Entire languages disappeared before anyone could read them. When the Greeks spoke of Atlantis or the Hindus of cyclical ages, perhaps they were not inventing myth. Perhaps they were remembering what the earth had already taught them, that nothing built by human hands lasts forever. In every cycle of light, there is a flicker before darkness. Each time we advance, something slips away, a piece of knowledge, a rhythm with the natural world. We replace understanding with control, balance with ambition. And when the balance breaks, the collapse begins. To the survivors, it feels sudden, cruel. To the planet, it is simply another turning of the wheel. What is most unsettling is how perfectly these collapses rhyme. Climate shifts, trade routes vanish, cities crumble, migrations begin. It happened to the Akkadians, it happened to the Maya. It may be happening again. Modern science tells us the same story through a different language: ice cores, sediment, magnetic drift. The Earth pulses in cycles of destruction and renewal, its memory etched in rock and air. We are not outside that rhythm. We are within it, repeating its cadence, convinced that technology can shield us from time. But maybe survival has never been about power. Maybe it's about memory, about what we choose to carry through the fire. The ancients may have known this. Their myths are not blueprints for domination, but reminders of humility. In their stories, the hero rarely conquers. He endures. He rebuilds. Each age begins not with invention, but with remembering what was lost. The greatest secret of the ancients wasn't power, it was how to begin again. Imagine them standing in the ashes of their world, looking to the stars as their ancestors once did. They plant seeds in the ruined soil, rebuild walls from fallen stone, and write their warnings in symbols they hope the future will still understand. That act to rebuild with knowledge that everything can vanish may be the truest form of wisdom. We, too, live in an age that believes it has conquered time. Our machines orbit the planet, our voices cross oceans of air, yet the same fragility hums beneath the surface. A single shift in nature, a single silence from the sun, and the towers we trust might crumble like sand. The ancients would not be surprised. They would only whisper, "Remember." Perhaps forgetting is not a flaw, but a mechanism, a way for the world to renew itself, wiping the slate clean for what must come next. The question is whether we can remember while we still have the chance. If every cycle of civilization erases the one before it, then the only way to break the pattern is to learn its rhythm, to hold memory as sacred as breath. For in the end, it may not be the monuments, the machines, or the maps that define us. It may be the simple act of recalling that we have been here before, that even in ruin, we are part of a pattern vast and unbroken. And somewhere, beneath the noise of progress, the earth still hums the same quiet tune, waiting for us to listen. There was a night when the sky changed colour. Long before our calendars and kingdoms, before the first stone cities or written words, people looked up and saw the stars begin to move. What had always been still began to fall. The first streak was silent, a thin arc of light cutting across the black, then another and another, until the heavens bloomed with fire. The night turned to day, but not with warmth. It was a cold, blinding radiance that turned rivers to mirrors and shadows to flame. They watched the heavens bloom with fire and called it the wrath of the gods. Across the world, myths remember this same terror. The Hopi speak of a fiery serpent that crossed the sky. The Norse told of stars falling before the great winter of Ragnarok. Ancient Chinese chronicles describe stones falling like rain, followed by years when the sun seemed dimmed. These were not poetic exaggerations. They were the language of witnesses. Modern science gives the story a different name, the Younger Dryas Boundary. Around 12,800 years ago, something struck the planet. It may have been a comet breaking apart in the atmosphere, or a cluster of impacts scattered across continents. In soil samples from that time, scientists find the same strange fingerprints: microscopic diamonds, metallic spherules, and a layer of soot marking the end of one age and the beginning of another. The evidence lies in blackened strata, in melted glass hidden beneath plains and ice. In North America, that line in the earth tells of sudden destruction. Vast herds of mammoths and mastodons vanished in the blink of a geological eye. Forests burned, then froze. Human tools appeared just below the boundary and disappeared just above it. The Clovis culture, the most advanced hunters of their age, gone without trace, as if the land itself had erased them. What could burn so bright and end so completely? When a comet enters the atmosphere, it moves faster than sound, faster than thought. Its arrival is not seen but felt a rush of heat, a thunder that ripples through air and stone. If multiple fragments struck at once, they would have ignited the forests, lifted the oceans, and filled the sky with dust. The beauty of the cosmos turned to violence in an instant. The same lights that inspired wonder became the messengers of destruction. To the ancients, this must have felt divine gods descending in anger, or the heavens collapsing in grief. Yet beneath the myth lies something universal, the memory of fragility. They saw how easily the world could change, how the sky could betray its promise of constancy. And so, they recorded it the only way they could, through story, through symbol. The dragons, the thunderbirds, the flaming chariots, all were metaphors for what they had truly seen. Stones that fell from the stars and set the earth aflame. The idea that such an event reshaped humanity may sound dramatic, but the evidence whispers otherwise. In Greenland's ice, traces of platinum appear suddenly, a cosmic element rare on Earth. In Europe, cave soot thickens at the same time. In the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent faltered. Every continent bears a sign. The disaster may not have struck in one place, but everywhere at once, a rain of fire spread across hemispheres. And from that moment forward, humanity was changed. The age of innocence ended, survival became invention. The people who saw the sky burn never forgot. They passed their terror down as myth, their awe as religion. They built temples to the stars not for worship but remembrance. Each new civilization, whether in Sumer or Mesoamerica, looked upward and wondered if the fire would return. Because deep down, they knew it might. After the fire came silence. The roaring heavens faded, leaving a world veiled in smoke. For days the sun tried to rise, but its light was thin and distant, like a dying ember behind a curtain of ash. The warmth that had nurtured the earth vanished almost overnight. Temperatures collapsed, seasons twisted, and the great green world turned grey. The scientists call it an impact winter, a time when dust and soot filled the atmosphere, reflecting sunlight back into space. What began as fire ended as ice. The planet shivered, crops withered, and the animals that had survived the burning began to starve. Forests stopped growing, rivers froze, and winds carried the scent of cold decay. For humans, it must have felt like a punishment without reason. They had endured the flames only to be buried in frost. Across continents, life retreated into small pockets of survival. The mammoths, the giant sloths, The saber-toothed cats, creatures that had roamed the earth for millions of years, disappeared forever. In their place came silence. Fossil records show a sudden break, a clean wound in time. Grains of pollen vanish from lake beds, replaced by dust. It was as if the planet had exhaled one final breath and gone still. To those who lived through it, the world must have seemed bewitched. Days stretched in pale twilight, nights endless and starless. The rhythm of nature itself faltered. Hunters who once tracked herds across vast plains found only emptiness. In caves and narrow valleys, they waited for warmth to return, not knowing if it ever would. Their stories would later speak of a long night, of gods who hid the sun, of a world suspended between fire and ice. Modern evidence mirrors those old fears. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica record a sharp plunge in temperature lasting more than 1,000 years. Beneath the microscope, the layers tell the same tale the myths do: fire, then darkness, then cold. Tiny particles of soot, traces of ammonia, even fragments of cosmic dust remain trapped in frozen time, proof of a catastrophe written in nature's own script. The collapse was not just environmental, it was human. Populations dwindled, migrations began, and memory fractured. The shared trauma of survival became the foundation for legend stories of a sun that vanished, of winters that never ended, of rebirth after unthinkable loss. And as the ice tightened its grip, humanity adapted. They learned to craft new tools, to cling together in the dimness, to dream of warmth even as the world slept. When the thaw finally came, it was slow and uncertain. The earth had changed, and so had we. What emerged from that frozen silence was not the same species that had walked beneath the fiery sky. We were smaller in number but greater in imagination, driven by the fear of forgetting. The age of myth began there in the shivering aftermath, when people needed meaning as much as they needed heat. When the sun vanished, humanity learned what true darkness meant. And from that darkness, something unexpected began to stir, not death, but endurance. Somewhere in the frozen lands and quiet oceans, life was waiting, sheltered in hidden corners the cold could not reach. Even in the worst winters, life finds a way to hide. While the great herds perished and the forests turned to glass, a few places remained untouched, small pockets where warmth clung to the earth like a secret. High in the mountains, deep in sheltered valleys, and on remote islands kissed by gentle currents, survivors waited out the end of the world. They built fires from the bones of fallen beasts, gathered what seeds they could, and told their children stories of the time when the sky had burned. Scientists studying ancient DNA find echoes of these refuges written in our blood. Around the time of the Younger Dryas, human populations across the globe shrank to a fraction of their size. Yet, within centuries, they began to grow again, from clusters of survivors who had somehow endured when everything else failed. The same genetic fingerprints appear in distant regions, hinting at isolated sanctuaries scattered like stars across the map. In Africa's highlands, in the caves of Anatolia, along the equatorial coasts, life huddled and waited. To the ancients, survival would have felt miraculous. Imagine stepping out of a mountain cave to find silence where there had once been songbirds, emptiness where forests once stood. The world would have seemed reborn but hollow, stripped of colour and noise. Each dawn carried both promise and fear, the warmth of the returning sun and the memory of the day it disappeared. These people, shaped by catastrophe, became the carriers of memory. In their myths, those who survived were not ordinary humans. They were the chosen, the few guided by gods, stars, or strange voices to shelter before the fire fell. Some stories tell of beings who led them underground, into great caverns of stone lit by fire that never died. Others speak of ships that crossed storming seas, carrying knowledge from a drowned homeland to new shores. To us, these sound like metaphors. But what if they are memories? What if the idea of divine guidance was born from the simple act of foresight, a few who recognized the warning signs and prepared? Throughout the world, legends of hidden refuges persist. The Hopi speak of the Sipapu, a portal to the underworld where their ancestors took shelter before emerging into the present age. The Sumerians tell of Utnapishtim, who built an ark before the Great Flood. In Andean myth, Viracocha led his people into caves to escape the burning Sunday. These tales, scattered yet alike, might be fragments of a single human truth. that survival has always depended on those who listen to the quiet warnings of the earth. When the cold loosened its hold, the survivors emerged into a world remade. They followed the rivers that still flowed, settled near the coasts that had not yet drowned, and began to rebuild. From their scattered sanctuaries came the seeds of new cultures, new languages, new gods. Every story of creation that followed every garden, every paradise, every world born from chaos, may trace its roots to this moment of fragile rebirth. The safe havens were more than shelters. They were the cradles of memory. The people who walked out of them carried the last embers of the world before, and perhaps more than just fire. They carried knowledge of the stars, of the seasons, of the signs that foretell disaster. In their hands, survival became legacy. It's possible that some knew the fire was coming. Perhaps their ancestors had seen it before, passing down warnings through rituals and skywatching. They might not have known what they were saving themselves from, only that something in the heavens had shifted and that the earth was about to answer. What if some knew the fire was coming and built their refuge beneath our feet? The ice would eventually melt, the forests return, and the sky grow calm again. But beneath that calm, the memory of fire remained waiting, whispering, becoming myth. When the fires dimmed and the ice began to retreat, the earth exhaled. Rivers that had been frozen beneath centuries of silence carved their way through ash and bone, revealing a land both ancient and newborn. The forests were gone, the plains unrecognizable, yet life crept back with quiet determination. Grass pushed through cinders, birds returned to skies that had forgotten their names. And from the mouths of caves, humanity emerged again, blinking against the light, carrying little but memory and instinct. They walked across a wounded world, guided by fragments of stories and the pull of survival. The seas had swallowed coasts where cities once stood, and the mountains had grown sharper, as though the planet itself had hardened. The survivors followed the rivers, settling near their fertile banks. There, something extraordinary began. In the geological record, this moment appears as a leap abrupt, unexplained. Agriculture, metallurgy, architecture, all rising in synchrony across distant continents. We are told these were inventions, sparks of genius born from the human mind. But perhaps they were not inventions at all. Perhaps they were reintroductions. Imagine the elders of those first new tribes, sitting beneath unfamiliar stars, telling their children how the old world had fallen. Perhaps among them were those who still remembered not details, but impressions. How seeds were sown, how stone was shaped, how fire was harnessed to melt earth into metal. Fragments of knowledge, scattered like embers across generations, waiting to ignite again. From the ashes of prehistory rose what we now call civilization. In Mesopotamia, people built ziggurats that mirrored mountains long erased. In Egypt, stone tombs reached toward the heavens, echoing shapes older than the desert itself. In South America, engineers aligned temples with the solstice sun, using geometry that would not be rediscovered for millennia. These were not primitive beginnings. They were recollections, the world remembering itself. Archaeologists describe this era as the Neolithic Revolution, a sudden awakening after the long sleep of the Ice Age. But beneath the scientific timeline hums a deeper rhythm. How could scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, with no shared language or contact, simultaneously unlock the same breakthroughs? Why do their earliest settlements already display mastery of measurement, irrigation, and celestial observation? It is as if they were guided by the memory of a blueprint too old to trace. Maybe history doesn't begin in Sumer, maybe it begins again in Sumer. Every new dawn carries the shadow of what came before. The first cities of the post-cataclysmic world were built upon layers of destruction, their bricks pressed from the dust of forgotten empires. Even their myths echo the pattern. Gods descending to teach order after chaos, kings restoring balance after the flood. To the survivors, these were acts of divine grace. To us, they may be signs of something older, the return of knowledge once buried by time. The air of this reborn earth must have felt heavy with both promise and grief. The people knew they were alive because something else was gone. They built monuments to permanence, as if to defy the memory of impermanence. Yet deep down, the awareness of fragility never left them. It shaped their rituals, their calendars, their faith. They measured time not just by harvests, but by catastrophe. The stars were no longer just guides, they were warnings. Across the plains of Anatolia, in the stones of Göbekli Tepe, humanity carved its rebirth into circles of limestone. Animals once hunted now stood frozen in eternal watch, surrounding pillars that pointed toward constellations. A temple, perhaps, or a memorial, a reminder of the fire and ice that had come before. The dawn after ash was not just a beginning. It was a remembering the faint echo of an older song, sung again with trembling voices. And as civilization rose from the dust, it carried with it the unspoken question that would haunt every age to follow. Who, or what, had shown them the way back? When the first seeds touched the soil, humanity called it a miracle. Crops grew where there had been only wilderness, and order replaced hunger. Yet almost every ancient culture claimed they did not discover this art alone. Someone or something showed them how. From Sumer came tales of the Apkallu, shining beings who rose from the sea to teach the first kings the ways of cultivation and law. In Egypt, Thoth appeared with the gift of writing and measurement, his ibis-headed form gliding between heaven and earth. The Maya spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who taught them to count the stars. In the high Andes, Viracocha emerged from the waters, carrying knowledge of architecture and time. Each story, separated by oceans and languages, begins the same way, with visitors descending to restore what was lost. To modern ears, these tales sound like myth, but myths are often the safest place to hide memory. The similarities are too precise to dismiss. The gods who arrived after the darkness did not demand worship. They gave instruction. They carried tools, not thunderbolts. They brought calendars, not weapons. And when their work was done, they vanished, promising to return when the world once again forgot. Perhaps these were not divine beings at all, but survivors of the earlier age, descendants of those who escaped the cataclysm in hidden sanctuaries or across the seas. To a newly reborn humanity, their knowledge would have seemed supernatural. Imagine a remnant of the old world emerging from the mountains, still carrying fragments of lost science, the ability to chart the sky, to read the rhythm of the earth, to bend stone into shape. Over generations, memory would polish their deeds into legend, transforming teachers into gods. The evidence hides in art and architecture. Figures with elongated skulls, adorned with feathers or wings, stand beside humans holding baskets of grain or styluses of writing. They are always taller, always radiant, always turning humanity's gaze upward. Across continents, the same images recur: a serpent coiled around a tree, a star above a pyramid, a hand reaching down from the clouds. These are not random symbols. They are echoes of an encounter that reshaped the world. It's easier to believe that civilization began from nothing, that progress is a straight climb from cave to city. Yet the oldest myths insist the opposite, that knowledge was restored, not invented. The gods didn't create humanity. They reminded us who we were. They came from the ruins of another world, and we called them gods. As centuries passed, their lessons splintered into religions, their names changing with each new tongue. But the essence remained, the idea that enlightenment comes from above, that wisdom is a gift carried on wings or stars. Perhaps the ancients were trying to preserve the truth beneath the poetry, that humanity's teachers were not divine but human, survivors guiding the next dawn. And if that is true, then one question lingers, suspended like a whisper in the smoke of history. What happened to that knowledge? If such guidance once returned the world to balance, why did it fade again? Did the teachers leave because their work was done, or because they saw the next fall approaching? Civilization rose quickly, almost too quickly. Within a few thousand years, the survivors of the cataclysm had built cities, mapped stars, and carved their history into stone. The flood of progress was breathtaking, but so was the fragility beneath it. Empires bloomed like flowers in spring, and just as swiftly, they withered. One by one, the first civilizations met quiet ends. The Akkadians vanished into desert wind. The Indus Valley cities turned to dust, their script unreadable even today. The Minoans' palaces fell silent beneath waves of ash and quake. Each fall was explained away by drought, war, or chance. Yet when you look closely, the collapses rhyme a rhythm of rise and ruin repeating across the world. The signs often began in the sky. Ancient texts speak of omens, bright stars where none should be, blood-coloured moons, unending storms. In the archaeological layers that follow, we find evidence of climate shifts and earthquakes. Crops failed, trade routes broke, and people fled their cities. It was as if the same unseen pulse that had once destroyed the world stirred again. The ancients believed they were being tested by their gods, but perhaps the earth itself was simply turning through another cycle. The Akkadians ruled a land of rivers that no longer flowed. Their records tell of 100 years without rain, of winds that stripped the fields bare. Then, nothing, silence. In the Indus Valley, streets once alive with markets were abandoned, pottery left unbaked in kilns. The people scattered, carrying their language into oblivion. On the island of Crete, Minoan frescoes depict serenity, dolphins leaping, dancers twirling, painted just before their civilization disappeared, under the weight of quakes and fire. The pattern feels almost scripted, as though time itself were following an old instruction. What if the end of the world isn't a moment, but a rhythm? Every rise contains the echo of collapse. Every triumph sows the seeds of forgetting. Humanity builds toward the sky, and nature reminds us how small we are. The ancients may have understood this better than we do. Their myths do not speak of permanent victory. They speak of balance. When balance is lost, the reset begins. The flood, the famine, the fire, all part of the same song repeating through ages. Between these cycles, there are brief silences, moments when the world seems calm, but the silence is deceptive. It is the pause between breaths. Our history, as grand as it appears, might be only the most recent verse in an unending refrain. The ruins beneath our feet are not mistakes. They are memories, reminders that survival depends on humility before the forces we cannot control. Archaeologists dig through these ruins searching for causes. They find bones, tools, and walls, but not the one thing that can never be unearthed, the fear. The quiet dread of a people who knew something vast was changing. They left behind prayers carved into stone, hoping their gods would remember them. Perhaps the gods did. Perhaps they were us watching from the future, still repeating the same patterns, still forgetting the same lessons. Each collapse erases what came before, yet never completely. A few fragments always endure an equation, a star map, a myth. Those fragments seed the next awakening. And so the rhythm continues. Destruction, survival, rediscovery, forgetting. We call it progress, but it might be something else, a loop disguised as a line. The ancients spoke of eternal return, of ages that renew themselves through fire. Maybe they weren't being poetic. Maybe they were remembering the last time the silence fell. And perhaps, beneath our own noise and light, that silence is returning again, not as an ending, but as the space before another beginning. There are moments in history when the sound of crackling fire drowns out the voice of knowledge. It begins, quietly, a torch lifted, a spark caught in dry parchment, and ends with centuries of memory reduced to drifting ash. The flames that consumed the Library of Alexandria did more than destroy scrolls. They erased worlds. Within its walls were the thoughts of philosophers, astronomers, and travelers who had tried to capture the secrets of the stars and the shape of time. When it burned, an entire dimension of human memory went with it. But perhaps the greater tragedy is that it may not have been an accident. The story is always the same. In Nineveh, the royal library of Ashurbanipal held tablets describing cosmic cycles and celestial catastrophes. In China, Emperor Qin ordered the burning of ancient texts to unify history under a single truth. In the New World, conquistadors set fire to Mayan codices, records of time measured not in centuries but in epochs. Everywhere, across continents and ages, knowledge that questioned the official story was silenced by flame. Some knowledge was lost by accident, some was buried on purpose. We are told that ignorance destroyed these archives, that wars and accidents claimed them. But what if the loss was too systematic to be coincidence? Each library was a mirror, reflecting humanity's relationship with its past. And each was shattered just as civilizations began to ask forbidden questions about origins, about gods, about the cycles of destruction that shaped the world. What if those questions struck too close to truths that power could not control? Imagine standing before those burning shelves, scrolls curling like leaves, the air thick with the scent of ink and smoke. Somewhere inside, a scribe's life's work turns to embers. Records of the heavens, of vanished lands, of the patterns that bind the earth and sky, all gone. The destruction feels less like chaos and more like cleansing, as though someone were scrubbing away the fingerprints of the past. Some historians argue that remnants of this lost knowledge survived in fragments. Papyrus recopied into Greek, tablets sealed in clay, symbols reinterpreted as myth. Yet when we piece those fragments together, they whisper of an older understanding, a world that measured time by the turning of the stars, not by the rise and fall of kings. Those who held that knowledge may have known about cycles of fire and flood, about the fragility of civilization itself, and perhaps that is why it was dangerous. Power thrives on forgetting. When people lose the story of who they were, they become easier to guide, easier to shape. The burning of books is never just about paper, it's about control of the timeline. If no record exists of a civilization before ours, then progress seems linear, inevitable. But if we ever proved that others rose before us, reaching heights we've only just begun to rediscover, the illusion of permanence would vanish. There's a haunting symmetry to how we treat knowledge. Every time humanity reaches for deeper understanding, something intervenes: war, disaster, or decree, as if the universe itself insists that wisdom must remain hidden until we're ready to bear its weight. Or perhaps it's not the universe that hides it, but us. Still, not everything was lost. Beneath temples, inside sealed caves, within the coded languages of myth, fragments survived. In symbols carved into stone and chants passed through generations, faint traces of the old memory remain. The world may burn its books, but it cannot erase the human instinct to preserve meaning. Somewhere, hidden in myth and geometry, the archives still breathe. And as we follow those traces, the whispers left behind by the smoke, we begin to glimpse the possibility that some knowledge was never destroyed at all, only hidden, waiting for those willing to search where history told them not to look. Not all the flames reached their targets. Some knowledge slipped through the cracks, carried quietly across generations by those who refused to forget. In temples, monasteries, and mountain sanctuaries, fragments of the old world were preserved not in grand halls of marble, but in whispered codes, symbols, and sacred numbers. The keepers of these memories called themselves many things: adepts, scribes, initiates. To the outside world, they were mystics, but in truth, they were guardians of the hidden memory. After the great libraries fell, wisdom went underground. The Hermetic schools of Egypt guarded their teachings in allegory, veiling science in stories of gods and alchemy. To the uninitiated, they spoke of transmutation and divine ascent. To those who could read between the lines, they described astronomy, mathematics, and the architecture of the cosmos. Across deserts and oceans, the same ideas reappeared encoded in geometry, in proportion, in art. The golden ratio, the sacred circle, the spiral of life, each one a relic of an older order disguised as philosophy. In the mountains of Tibet, monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, sealing them in caves that no conqueror could reach. In Persia, the Magi traced the motion of the heavens, preserving star maps older than their temples. The builders of Gothic cathedrals in Europe carved cosmic diagrams into stone, hidden behind the faces of saints. The continuity is uncanny. Cultures separated by continents seem to share an invisible lineage, as if drawing from the same buried source. Perhaps they were. Perhaps these secret threads connect directly to the age before the Cataclysm, to the scientists, priests, and astronomers who saw the sky fall and vowed to keep the truth alive. They knew that civilizations rise and collapse, that memory is fragile, and that each new age begins by rediscovering what the last one lost. So they chose a language that could outlast time: symbol. Even the most ordinary shapes became carriers of meaning. The triangle, the circle, the eye within the pyramid, all simple yet enduring. Each held layers of interpretation, revealing more only to those who understood the code. To most, they were decorations. To the initiated, they were reminders the geometry of the earth aligned with the geometry of the heavens. A map of what once was, and perhaps what will be again. In hidden chambers and whispered symbols, the memory of the old world still breathes. The guardians of knowledge never claimed power, they sought continuity. By encoding their understanding within art and ritual, they ensured that truth could survive even the ignorance of empire. When rulers changed and dogma hardened, their symbols adapted. Ancient star charts became stained glass windows. Temple blueprints transformed into mandalas. Each generation saw only beauty, only the few recognized the message beneath. To this day, their influence lingers quietly in plain sight. The alignment of cathedrals with solstices, the repetition of sacred numbers in architecture, the mirrored design of ancient temples and modern observatories. These are not coincidences. They are the fingerprints of continuity, proof that memory, though hidden, never truly died. And now, as technology peers into the earth and sky with new eyes, we begin to see what they always knew, that beneath religion and legend lies a science of pattern, a map of time itself. Those ancient guardians were not worshippers of mystery, they were its keepers. And their legacy, though faint, is beginning to stir again, calling modern minds back to the secrets they once swore to protect. The story of knowledge did not end with the ancients. It only went quiet, buried beneath centuries of noise. But in the last 100 years, the silence has begun to break. From deserts and jungles to the frozen poles, a new generation of seekers is listening again not to myth but to data. What they find feels less like discovery and more like remembering. Archaeologists using LiDAR technology now scan through jungle canopies and uncover entire lost cities once swallowed by time. In Guatemala, what appeared to be untouched forest revealed a network of temples, roads, and canals, proof that civilizations thrived where we thought only wilderness had been. In Turkey, ground-penetrating radar maps show that Göbekli Tepe's stone circles are only the surface of a much larger complex buried below, as though someone intentionally hid it from the ages. Every new tool of science becomes a key, unlocking memories the Earth has been holding in its soil. Beneath the ice of Greenland, satellites detect craters that match the timeline of ancient catastrophe. In the DNA of ancient bones, geneticists trace sudden bottlenecks, moments when humanity nearly vanished before spreading again. Even our own bodies hold the record of survival, as if evolution itself carries a coded diary of every crisis we've endured. The further we look, the more the past begins to echo what the ancients already knew. Historians once dismissed myths as fantasy. Now, they approach them like encrypted archives. Flood legends align with geological data, showing abrupt sea level rise. Descriptions of celestial fire coincide with evidence of comet fragments and impact soot. The patterns are unmistakable. Science and story, once divided, are converging. What religion, once framed as divine punishment, geology reveals as cosmic rhythm. And perhaps that's the greatest revelation of all, that we are not uncovering new truths, but rediscovering what was always there. The hidden archives never truly disappeared. They just changed form. Stone became sand, myth became scripture, and now scripture becomes data. The continuum of human memory persists, shifting language but keeping its heartbeat. Across the world, scientists, explorers, and even independent researchers are reaching the same conclusion through different doors. History is deeper and more complex than we were taught. LiDAR, carbon dating, isotopic analysis. These tools of reason are confirming the whispers once dismissed as legend. The forbidden and the factual are beginning to overlap. Yet, with each revelation comes unease. If our story is older, if civilizations rose and fell before ours, then what does that say about the future? Technology allows us to see the past with clarity unknown to any other age, but it also forces us to face a truth the ancients tried to preserve. Cycles repeat. The same forces that buried their cities lie dormant beneath ours. For the first time in millennia, the Earth is beginning to remember, and in that remembering, it invites us to listen not with fear, but with awareness. The modern seekers are not prophets or conspiracists. They are simply translators between two languages, the language of myth and the language of measurement. Both tell the same story, one in symbols, the other in equations. Together, they reveal a planet that records everything, even when we do not. It's easy to believe we are at the height of understanding, that our digital age stands apart from the ancient world. But perhaps our technology is just the latest tool in an unbroken chain, the new form of the same instinct that led monks to copy scrolls and priests to carve stone. The urge to preserve truth never dies, it only changes its handwriting. And so, as satellites orbit the sky once watched by our ancestors, the circle closes. We are becoming what they once were, the archivists of memory, the keepers of stories, the witnesses of time. The question that now remains is not whether we will uncover the full truth, but whether we are ready to see it. Long before the first machines, before iron wheels and roaring engines, The ancients wrote of vehicles that moved without beasts, of lights that crossed the heavens like living fire. In the scriptures of India, the skies hummed with vimanas flying chariots of dazzling metal, guided by sound and thought. The Greek poet Hesiod spoke of thunder weapons forged by divine hands, splitting mountains as though the air itself had turned to flame. Across the world, separated by oceans and centuries, people told of gods who travelled in ships of light, descending with a roar that shook the earth. Were the gods' weapons divine, or remembered machines of a lost age? To most, these are just metaphors, myths woven to explain lightning and comet fire, but their details are too vivid to ignore. The Sanskrit epics describe engines fueled by liquid fire, projectiles that could scorch entire armies, and devices that could rise vertically, gliding through the clouds. The Mayans carved beings seated in contraptions, surrounded by symbols that resemble modern instruments. In the book of Ezekiel, a prophet watches a wheel within a wheel descend from the sky, rimmed with eyes that glow like crystal. The ancients used the language they had, divine, celestial, godly, to describe things that defied comprehension. Perhaps these stories are not fiction, but fragments, remnants of a memory older than civilization itself, of a time when humanity understood forces we have only just begun to rediscover. Fire, magnetism, vibration, sound to us, they are science. To them, they were magic. When knowledge was lost, myth became the container that kept its essence alive. Imagine a survivor of the last cataclysm describing an aircraft to a future generation that had forgotten flight. The roar becomes thunder. The glow becomes the breath of a god. The pilot, shining in protective metal, becomes divine. Over centuries, poetry fills the gaps memory cannot. The truth remains, wrapped in metaphor. In India's Mahabharata, two armies face each other under a trembling sky. One weapon is unleashed, a sphere of brightness that turns night into day. The wind howls, the rivers boil, and those who survive are marked by sickness and hair that falls away. Scholars say it is allegory. Scientists, reading between the lines, recognize something else: radiation. Could an echo of lost technology be hiding behind the veil of devotion? Even Plato's account of Atlantis contains hints of forgotten engineering. He describes bridges spanning canals, temples plated in metals unknown to his age, and devices that drew power from the earth itself. What if these descriptions were not imagination, but recollection fragments passed down from those who witnessed machines that could harness energy in ways we no longer can? Skeptics ask, where is the evidence? But perhaps the evidence was never meant to survive. When civilizations collapse, the fragile wonders of technology vanish first. Stone endures, metal corrodes, memory fades. The myths remain because they are portable, carried not in vaults, but in minds. It is tempting to fill these gaps with theories of visitors from other worlds. But perhaps the truth is closer and more human. What if the gods were simply the last inheritors of a dying science, men and women who understood principles of flight, resonance, and power now buried beneath myth? Their tools would have seemed divine, their wisdom supernatural. Over time, reverence replaced remembrance. In this light, the myths become less about gods and more about continuity, proof that knowledge can leap across ages, disguised as wonder. The thunderbolts of Zeus, the spears of the sky gods, the luminous chariots of the east, all may point to a civilization advanced not in luxury, but in understanding. Perhaps humanity has risen to this height before, only to watch its creations burn with the world around them. The lesson in these stories may not be about the power of gods, but the fragility of genius. What we call myth might be a warning that every golden age carries within it the seed of its own forgetting. If the stories of fire and flood are true, if civilizations have risen and fallen in cycles, then one question lingers at the edge of reason: is it all chance, or is there design behind the destruction? Perhaps the Earth is not merely a stage for chaos, but a classroom, a place where intelligence itself is tested again and again, through survival, forgetting, and rediscovery. The ancient texts hint at this idea in veiled tones. The Emerald Tablet speaks of the cycles of becoming, where creation and dissolution are twin forces, neither good nor evil, but necessary. The Vedic hymns describe time not as a line, but as a wheel spinning through golden and dark ages in endless return. Even Plato's Timaeus suggests that civilization's resets are not random, but rhythmic purifications of a world that remembers too much. To them, catastrophe was not punishment, it was renewal. Modern science whispers similar truths in different language. Extinction events appear in patterns, marked by cosmic alignments, solar cycles, and magnetic reversals. Life on Earth does not progress in a steady climb, but in waves of flourishing and collapse. The pattern is elegant, almost intentional. Some see blind nature, others see the signature of design. Maybe the test was never survival, but remembrance. What if consciousness itself is the experiment? Each age born from the ashes of the last, carrying fragments of what came before, rediscovering truths that always existed. Perhaps the goal is not to conquer nature, but to remember our place within it. We build, we destroy, we rebuild, each time shaping a more refined reflection of what we once were. The ancients called it divine order, we call it evolution, but both may describe the same phenomenon, the universe learning itself through us. When viewed this way, the cataclysms are no longer random tragedies but lessons encoded into time. They erase arrogance, forcing humility. They erase excess, restoring balance. Humanity is the student that refuses to graduate, doomed to repeat the same curriculum until it remembers the first lesson, that knowledge without wisdom is fire without direction. If Earth is a classroom, who built it? Some point to gods, others to forces so vast they have no name. The question may not matter. The mechanism itself is awe-inspiring. An intelligent system of creation, loss, and renewal, where consciousness expands through contrast, through forgetting and remembering, through birth and extinction. Even now, our age stands at another turning point. We speak of artificial intelligence and planetary stewardship, yet beneath the surface, the same fragility hums. The old myths warned of this moment not in superstition, but in pattern. We are repeating the lesson once more. The test is unfolding again. In the stillness between progress and peril, one can almost feel the weight of that cosmic rhythm, as if the universe itself were holding its breath, waiting to see if we will remember this time. Whether we call it God, the cosmos, or simple chance, the effect is the same. A design too intricate to be random, too ancient to be accidental. And if this experiment truly exists, then humanity's purpose has never been to escape the cycle but to awaken within it. If the cycles of fire and forgetting are real, then our story is not finished, it's only repeating. The same clues that marked the world's earlier endings have begun to stir again. Magnetic fields wandering faster than ever recorded, strange lights over the poles, solar storms intensifying, ice melting from regions that have been frozen since memory began. The Earth is shifting, as if it remembers something we've tried to ignore. Geologists speak of subtle tremors in the planet's magnetic heartbeat. North no longer points where it once did. The poles drift with a restlessness unseen in recorded history. Ancient myths described this moment in their own language. The sky turning, stars wandering from their paths, the sun rising where it should not. What they called omen, we now call data. The pattern feels familiar, as though an old clock is beginning to chime again. The same clock that ended their world, may be ticking again. All around us, evidence hums quietly. In the depths of the Atlantic, researchers detect fresh rifts opening in the seabed. In the high Arctic, methane bursts from permafrost like breath long held. Across continents, animals migrate erratically, their instincts disturbed by invisible signals. To the ancients, these were the warning signs that the balance between heaven and earth was shifting. We have new names for the same mysteries: climate change, geomagnetic drift, cosmic radiation. Different language, same unease. History's ruins suggest that humanity has stood at this threshold before. Civilizations reached their zenith just before the silence. The Akkadians, the Olmecs, the builders of Tiwanaku, each reached a point of mastery, then vanished as if a curtain fell between acts. We have always told ourselves their endings were isolated, local. Yet the timing overlaps in uncanny rhythm, like multiple instruments playing the same fading note. Perhaps this is how the cycle feels from within, not apocalypse, but transition. One world dissolving as another begins, the line between them blurred by fear and forgetting. The ancients saw this not as punishment but inevitability. To them, time was circular, not linear. Destruction was simply renewal seen from the wrong side. Still, Awareness changes everything. We are the first civilization to study the evidence of those before us in real time, to see their mistakes carved in stone and soil. We can measure their fires, trace their floods, and feel the tremor of their lessons beneath our feet. The question is whether we will listen or repeat them. Modern prophets wear lab coats now. They warn not of divine wrath, but of systems reaching critical thresholds. Oceans rising, fields drying, energy surging. Yet, even as the world tilts toward uncertainty, we continue as if the cycle were fiction. The ancients might have called this the forgetting the moment when pride blinds a people just before the return of balance. But perhaps that forgetting is also mercy. If we remembered every ending, we might never dare to build again. Every monument, every discovery, every dream would be haunted by inevitability. Forgetting gives us courage. Remembering gives us warning. Between them lies the narrow path of wisdom, the awareness that creation and destruction are partners, not enemies. And maybe that is why our story feels incomplete, because the ending has not yet chosen its form. We stand suspended between the memory of what was and the possibility of what might be, hearing faint echoes of a cycle older than our species. Somewhere in those echoes, the earth whispers its refrain: everything returns. If the ancients left us any message, it may not be prophecy or warning, but invitation to remember without despair, to build without arrogance, to live knowing that nothing, not even endings, are final. The story of humanity is not a straight line, but a circle drawn in ash and starlight, always beginning again. And now, as the same cosmic clock resumes its ticking, we find ourselves where they once stood, beneath a shifting sky, staring upward, wondering what comes next. Every civilization has looked to the heavens for signs, and now we do the same. The telescopes are larger, the equations more precise, but the feeling is the same, that quiet awareness that the sky is shifting. In laboratories and observatories around the world, scientists record changes that sound eerily familiar. The sun's heartbeat, once steady, is quickening. Magnetic fields twist and wander. Comets move through the dark, tracing paths last seen by eyes that watched from stone temples. The heavens are moving again in rhythms our ancestors knew too well. In ancient times, these motions were omens. The Babylonians carved them into clay, the Maya into stairways of light. They tracked the dance between the earth and the sun, predicting droughts, eclipses, even catastrophe. To them, the sky was a clock, not metaphorically, but literally. Its hands were planets, its pendulum the sun's cycle of fire and rest. When those patterns shifted, something on Earth always followed, and now the same signs are returning. Solar activity is intensifying. Storms on the sun grow wider, sending ripples of energy that brush against Earth's magnetic skin. We call them auroras, curtains of green and violet, but to the old world, they were the first warnings. The Inuit spoke of spirits dancing before great change. The Chinese called them dragons of light, their appearance marking the fall of dynasties. Today, our satellites record those same lights expanding, pushing closer to the equator than in living memory. Meanwhile, the planet's magnetic poles drift, sliding across latitudes at increasing speed. Compasses lean toward new directions. Animals migrate along unfamiliar routes, guided by instincts that no longer align with the invisible field. This isn't myth. It's physics, a reminder that the Earth's heart of iron and fire never stops breathing, and sometimes it changes rhythm. Scientists whisper about a possible reversal, a flip in the planet's magnetic field. The last time it happened, humanity was not yet civilized. Even the stars behave strangely. Astronomers note comets appearing in sequences that match those recorded in medieval and ancient chronicles. Each one carries a faint signature frozen dust, cosmic debris reminders of a universe that occasionally brushes too close. We see them now through telescopes and digital sensors, yet the awe they inspire hasn't changed. Somewhere deep in our collective memory, we remember that comets once meant endings. The patterns unfolding above us are not prophecies. They are physics repeating its chorus. But within that repetition lies an unsettling beauty. The sky we watch is the same sky that watched over every fall before ours. The same solar pulse that scorched the Ice Age plains now hums above our satellites. The same cosmic rhythms that guided the Maya calendar tick behind our atomic clocks. What feels new is only a returning echo. We are told not to read meaning into these cycles, not to see significance in coincidence, but meaning is how humanity survives chaos. The ancients didn't just fear the sky, they studied it, lived by it, built their calendars and temples to its rhythm. They knew that to understand the heavens was to understand themselves. Somewhere along the way, we replaced that reverence with prediction, as if knowledge could replace wisdom. Yet here we are again, standing beneath familiar patterns. The comets, the storms, the magnetic wanderings, they form a language, one we used to speak fluently. It doesn't foretell doom. It tells us that time is circular, that every rise carries its mirror image of decline. The earth is whispering the same story through the motion of its sky. That balance must return. And as the lights ripple above frozen landscapes and instruments hum with invisible data, humanity looks up once more uneasy, curious, half awake, sensing that the sky has begun to remember us. The ancients looked up and saw their fate written in the stars. We look down instead at screens, at data, at the glowing cities we've built to rival the constellations. Yet the pattern remains. Each civilization before us reached a point where comfort became blindness, where progress outpaced humility. They believed they had conquered nature, that their knowledge made them untouchable. Then, as if on cue, the balance shifted. Every empire believes it's different, until the sky reminds it otherwise. Our world hums with energy and noise, yet beneath it runs the same quiet instability that ended ages before. The climate grows restless, oceans warm, forests fade into memory. We build walls of technology to hold back the tide satellites to track storms, algorithms to predict famine. But the planet moves with a rhythm no code can tame. For all our precision, we are still guessing, still pretending the forces that shaped us are under control. In the Bronze Age, cities rose on promises of eternal plenty. They built canals and granaries, temples and towers. Then came the droughts, the quakes, the sudden silence. Their fall was not chaos but consequence. Nature had simply collected its debt. We tell ourselves we are wiser, that our satellites and science protect us from that fate. Yet our fragility lies in the same place dependence. We rely on invisible networks to feed, to heal, to remember. We have traded stone and seed for code and current, but the bargain is unchanged. The lesson echoes through history's ruins. Civilizations do not die because they are weak, but because they forget how to adapt. The Akkadians ignored the warning winds. The Maya carved calendars but could not read the storm. We too feel the tremors in markets, in politics, in the weather itself, and still we build higher, faster, further. The cycle doesn't punish arrogance. It simply resets the scale. Yet the end is rarely dramatic. It's not the explosion of a single moment, but the slow unraveling of connection, people drifting from each other, meaning dissolving, the sense of belonging fading beneath noise. The ancients watched their rivers dry, we watch our attention erode. The result is the same. Isolation, confusion, the quiet fear that progress has outpaced understanding. But perhaps what makes this age unique is not our vulnerability, but our awareness of it. We have the benefit of hindsight, the evidence of every collapse before ours etched into the earth. We know how fragile balance is, how easily the sky can shift from wonder to warning. And still, we stand at the edge, repeating their stories in new forms, our towers of glass and steel, gleaming like modern ziggurats beneath the same uneasy heavens. If there is a difference, it lies in choice. The ancients read the signs and called them destiny. We can read them as memory reminders that change is not failure, but invitation. The earth is not ending, it is correcting, and perhaps that is the mercy within the pattern. The opportunity, however brief, to remember what those before us forgot. Because somewhere, deep within the rhythm of collapse and renewal, there is still time to listen, to adapt, to turn our gaze upward again, and see not doom, but reflection. When the world feels uncertain, we look backward, not to retreat, but to remember how we survived before. Every age that has fallen left behind the same quiet instruction, that endurance depends not on power, but on memory. The ancients carried this truth in ritual and story, planting wisdom like seeds beneath the soil of time. We may have forgotten their language, but not their rhythm. If forgetting led to ruin, maybe remembering can save us. The lesson of the past is not buried in catastrophe, it is woven into what came after. When the floodwaters receded, people rebuilt closer to the mountains. When fire consumed the forests, they learned to burn small fields to prevent greater loss. When the sky dimmed, they tracked the stars and waited for warmth to return. They did not deny the cycles, they lived with them. For every collapse, there was adaptation. For every end, a beginning quietly forming. Our ancestors built their calendars not to predict doom, but to stay in sync with the pulse of the world. They understood that time was not a line, but a wave, and survival meant learning to move with its current, not against it. Their temples aligned with solstices. Their myths mirrored the balance between chaos and order. Beneath their superstition lay science, and beneath their fear lay acceptance. They endured because they remembered that nothing, not even darkness, is permanent. Today, we stand again between ages, a moment poised between forgetting and awakening. We have technology capable of connecting every human mind, yet we often use it to drown in noise. We study the stars with greater clarity than ever before, yet our sense of wonder fades beneath screens. The ancients might look at us and see the same arrogance they once warned against the belief that mastery over nature is mastery over fate. But they might also recognize something else: potential. Because remembering is not nostalgia, it's evolution. It is the act of retrieving what is essential from what has been lost. When we restore balance with the earth, with each other, with ourselves, we carry forward the true inheritance of those who came before us. The knowledge that power without purpose is hollow, and survival without meaning is just endurance. In our age, remembering may take a different form. It might mean listening to the land again, noticing the subtle signs of change our ancestors once read in the wind and stars. It might mean rebuilding communities that value shared resilience over individual conquest. Or it might be as simple as slowing down long enough to feel the planet breathing beneath our feet, long enough to recognize that we are part of its story, not apart from it. If the cycles of fire and forgetting continue, then remembering is our rebellion. It is how we write continuity into a universe built on impermanence. When we look at the ruins of past civilizations, we often see failure. But what if those ruins are not tombstones, but guideposts? What if their message is not, "We perished, but we began again"? The greatest secret of the ancients may not have been their technology or their myths, but their faith in renewal. They watched the world burn and still planted seeds. They built monuments that faced the sunrise as a declaration that the light always returns. Perhaps that is the meaning we are meant to inherit: not fear of destruction, but reverence for what follows it. The sky that once terrified them is the same sky that shelters us now. Its rhythms haven't changed. What has changed is our willingness to listen. And as the heavens begin their old dance once more, we find ourselves standing where they once stood between remembrance and forgetting, holding the fragile hope that this time we might remember forward. In the quiet hum of laboratories and the glow of computer screens, something ancient is stirring. Equations, once stripped of mystery, begin to sound like prayers written in numbers. Physicists peer into the quantum field and describe a fabric that connects everything invisible, yet alive with potential. What they call entanglement, the ancients called spirit. What we now name energy, they once named breath. Different language, same truth whispered through different mouths. We are rediscovering what the ancients never forgot. In Egypt, priests spoke of Ma'at, the balance that holds the universe together. To live in harmony with it was to live in truth. In India, the sages of the Vedas sang of Brahman, the endless field from which all forms arise and return. In Mesoamerica, the Maya measured time not as a line but as an unfolding rhythm, each age echoing the one before. They all saw what science is now beginning to glimpse again, that the world is not a machine of separate parts, but a single breathing organism, pulsing with intelligence. The deeper we look into matter, the less solid it becomes. At the smallest scale, the universe behaves like consciousness, responding to observation, shaping reality through attention. The ancients described this long ago, as above, so below, as within, so without. They knew that mind and world mirror each other, that the act of awareness shapes the pattern of existence. Now, our most advanced instruments confirm what their temples were built, to express that reality is participatory. Even ecology, the science of life's web, has begun to echo these forgotten hymns. Forests communicate through hidden networks of fungi, exchanging nutrients and warning of danger like neural pathways in a larger brain. Oceans regulate themselves through invisible balances, sensing disruption long before we can. The Earth is not passive matter. It listens, it remembers, it reacts. For every action, a correction. For every excess, a return to balance. The same law that governed the stars in ancient myth governs the cells in our blood. It is humbling to realize that the language of science, which once banished myth to the margins, is circling back to meet it. What was sacred is becoming measurable, and what was measurable is becoming sacred again. Energy, vibration, resonance, the vocabulary of physics could be mistaken for the poetry of initiation. The ancients carved it into stone. We simulate it with quantum equations. They built temples aligned to solstices and star paths. We build particle accelerators and space telescopes. Both are instruments seeking the same music. When modern scientists describe the universe as a vast field of probability, always shifting, always reborn, they are repeating what mystics have said since the dawn of speech. Creation is not a one-time event. It is continuous, a dance between order and chaos, form and void. The Big Bang is simply the latest translation of an older idea that everything was born from a sound, a vibration, a word. Perhaps this convergence is no coincidence. Maybe we are approaching the same point of understanding reached by civilizations long forgotten, the threshold where knowledge and reverence become indistinguishable. They left us clues not out of superstition, but memory. The spiral of a seashell, the ratio of a temple wall, the geometry of a star's orbit, all maps of the same unity. What we call progress may be the slow remembering of an eternal truth, that consciousness is not separate from the cosmos, but its expression. The universe dreams through us. The scientists measure its pulse. The poets feel its rhythm. Both are tracing the same invisible thread back to its source. And as these two languages, the logical and the luminous, begin to merge again, a bridge forms between the world that was and the one becoming. Humanity stands once more at the edge of revelation, just as our ancestors did before the fire fell, before the floods came, aware that the boundary between discovery and divinity was never truly there. Across the world, something subtle is unfolding, not a revolution, but a remembering. It begins quietly, in the soft hours of night when curiosity outweighs sleep. People watch old documentaries, decode ancient texts, trace constellations through their phone screens, searching for meaning in the pattern that connects everything. It looks like nostalgia, but it isn't. It's memory reawakening on a global scale. The same hunger for truth that built the pyramids is stirring again. It rises through scientists who question timelines once thought settled, through philosophers who see the same geometry in atoms and galaxies, through ordinary seekers who feel that the stories we've been told no longer fit the shape of what we know. Every field, from archaeology to consciousness research, is pulling on the same invisible thread, a suspicion that the past was not primitive, but cyclical. That history might not be a line of ascent, but a spiral of forgetting and rediscovery. Digital networks, for all their noise, have become the new temples of connection. Ideas once whispered in secret now spread across the world in moments. Ancient symbols are reinterpreted through mathematics. Lost languages are decoded with machine learning. Myths are mapped against climate data and found to echo real events. Technology, once the divider between humanity and nature, is becoming a mirror, showing us that the same patterns exist in code and constellation, in algorithm and archetype. Some call this a new age, others a mass delusion. But labels don't matter. What matters is the feeling that tremor beneath the surface of everyday life, the sense that something vast is waking up through us. People who have never met share the same questions. Who were we before history began? What knowledge did we lose? What are we remembering now? It's as if the collective mind of humanity is turning inward, aligning with the rhythm of the Earth's long memory. In ancient times, awakening was the domain of mystics, individuals who glimpsed the eternal and tried to describe it in parable and song. Now, that awareness seems to be collective. Art, science, and philosophy are beginning to overlap, not by coincidence but by necessity. When logic reaches its limit, imagination takes its hand. The division between the rational and the sacred is fading, replaced by something older, a vision of unity disguised as progress. We are told that civilization is built on innovation, on breaking from the past. But perhaps true evolution lies not in invention, but in reconnection. The old knowledge was never about control, it was about balance. Every ancient culture, from the Nile to the Andes, spoke of a harmony between human intention and cosmic design. They believed the universe responded to alignment, not conquest. As we rediscover that idea through ecology, through quantum science, through the quiet ache of intuition, we may be remembering not just who we were, but who we are meant to be. This awakening does not shout, it hums. It grows through quiet fascination, through patterns glimpsed in the clouds of data and the glow of screens. It is not rebellion or revelation, but a return, a circle closing after millennia of separation. And as the world begins to hum with this shared curiosity, we find ourselves standing again at the threshold of the same mystery that haunted our ancestors. The awareness that knowledge is never truly lost, only waiting to be recognized. At the end of every story lies the same image. A city in ruins, the wind carrying dust through its broken streets. We call it an ending, but perhaps it is something else. In the dust, there is memory. Beneath every collapse lies a code, written not in words but in pattern. The ancients may have understood this better than we do, that what ends on the surface is only the beginning of something deeper. Every civilization ends, but the code of its rebirth is always hidden in its ruins. Archaeologists dig through layers of ash and stone, searching for what was lost. Yet, unknowingly, they are also uncovering themselves. Each buried fragment mirrors something in our present world, the same ambitions, the same mistakes, the same fragile hope. We build our towers from steel instead of clay, but the rhythm of creation and forgetting has not changed. Perhaps it never will. The universe seems to favor cycles over permanence, renewal over control. In the dust of past worlds, a message repeats. Balance is not kept by force, but by understanding. When humanity drifts too far from the pulse of the earth, nature writes its correction in fire and flood. But even destruction is not cruel. It is calibration. The cataclysms that terrify us may be the universe's way of restoring rhythm. What looks like chaos from below may be harmony seen from above. The ancients wove this truth into myth. The phoenix that burns and rises again, the flood that washes the world clean, the serpent that sheds its skin. These are not prophecies of doom, but descriptions of renewal. Each story encodes the same algorithm: dissolution, transformation, rebirth. The secret is not how to escape the cycle, but how to remember through it. If we could read the ruins of our own world, the satellites drifting in orbit, the skyscrapers reaching for the clouds, what message would they send to whoever comes next? Would they see arrogance or wonder, fear or faith? Maybe both. The code of every age carries contradiction. It warns and it teaches, destroys and preserves. The ancients left stone because they knew it endures. We leave data because we believe it will. Both are forms of prayer, both attempts to speak to the future through the silence that follows collapse. Perhaps the cataclysm was never punishment. Perhaps it was design, a cycle meant to reset imbalance and test remembrance. Each age forced to relearn humility, to rebuild understanding, to rediscover the sacred relationship between thought and creation. The ancients called it karma, ma'at, cosmic law. Science calls it entropy. Both describe the same truth. Energy must return to balance, and every excess demands correction. When we walk among ruins, we are not only looking backward, we are standing at the midpoint between what has been and what will be. The dust beneath our feet contains atoms from forgotten empires, from stars that died before Earth was born. Every breath we take passes through the same cycle, destruction into renewal, memory into matter. The dust is the code, and we are its continuation. Maybe this is the final secret the ancients tried to preserve, that endings are not failures but instructions. The world renews itself not because it must, but because it can. Our task is not to avoid the cycle, but to evolve within it, to rise each time with a little more wisdom carried forward through the ashes. In the hush between eras, the dust begins to settle. The air holds its breath. Somewhere, beneath crumbling stone and fading signal, the same pulse beats again, steady, patient, eternal. The universe is not finished. It is remembering. Beneath the silence of forests, beneath the slow grinding of stone and tide, the earth remembers. Every grain of sand is an echo, every mountain a scar that speaks in the language of time. To us, the world feels solid, eternal, unmoving, yet it breathes. It shifts, sighs, records. Its memory is not written in books or symbols, but in the tilt of continents, the whisper of fossilized leaves, the rhythm of seasons that outlive empires. The earth does not forget it waits. Its oceans are tears shed for the worlds that came before. Its mountains, the bones of ages long buried. Beneath our feet, the crust carries the fingerprints of catastrophe. Layers of ash, traces of iridium, black seams of soot marking where fire once devoured the sky. Each epoch ends, yet nothing is lost. The earth folds its memories inward, compressing them until they become stone. Even silence leaves an imprint, a pattern in the dust. Ice, too, remembers. In frozen sheets stretching across the poles, the planet keeps its diary, a timeline of air and ash, of warmth and winter, of forgotten summers. Within those crystalline vaults, the story of fire and flood still lingers. The smoke of ancient forests, the breath of vanished species, the ghost of our ancestors' first fears. We measure it with instruments now, calling it data, but what we are really reading is memory, the planet's long, patient recollection of everything that has ever lived and died upon it. Sometimes, we imagine ourselves apart from this memory, as if humanity were a new chapter in a different book. Yet we are written into the same page. Our bones will one day become the sediment of a future world, our cities reduced to the faintest of geological whispers. Even our monuments, the ones we build to outlast time, will dissolve into the same dust that once held the fossils of forgotten giants. The earth will remember us, as it remembered them, without judgment. Perhaps that is its greatest mercy. It does not record good or evil, only rhythm, creation, destruction, renewal. The same cycle we fear is the pulse that keeps it alive. Volcanoes erupt to birth new lands, quakes reshape the pattern of rivers, forests burn and grow again. The planet is not dying, it is dreaming, shifting between forms, keeping the continuity of life through change. When we look at the horizon and feel awe, we are sensing this memory. The slow unfolding of time is visible there in the curve of a mountain, in the shimmer of waves that have touched 1,000 shores. Every sunset is a continuation of the first light that rose over the primordial sea. Every breath we take has been breathed before, exhaled by forests that no longer stand, by beings whose names we will never know. The earth holds all of it, the rise of continents, the fall of civilizations, the fragile pulse of each rebirth. It remembers not as a witness, but as a participant. Its story and ours are the same, written in cycles of forgetting and rediscovery. We dig into its surface for history, yet it is the one watching us, keeping score in silence. And perhaps, as it turns beneath the stars, it waits for something not yet spoken for us to finally understand that memory is not just something we carry. It is something we belong to. Every breath you take is older than you are. The air that fills your lungs once moved through the forests of forgotten ages, through the lungs of creatures whose names are lost. You are not separate from that lineage. You are its continuation. You carry the residue of everything that came before, the salt of ancient oceans, the iron of distant stars, the memory of fire. You are living proof that the world has ended before, and yet it goes on. You are the story the ancients hoped someone would remember. Their blood runs in your veins. Their fears shaped the instincts you call intuition. Their victories are the pulse beneath your skin. When you look at the night sky, your eyes mirror the same wonder that guided their temples and calendars. They feared the same storms, watched the same moon, listened to the same silence that still hangs over deserts and oceans. Every step you take on this earth is a step on the bones of your ancestors, and they are still speaking through you, not in words, but in the deep, unshakable knowing that life endures. It is easy to see ourselves as fragile, standing at the edge of another uncertain age, but fragility is not weakness, it is sensitivity. Humanity survives not because it is the strongest, but because it remembers how to bend. The survivors of the ancient cataclysm did not outlast the world through power they endured, through adaptation, through faith, through the quiet courage of remembering what mattered when everything else fell away. That same resilience moves in us still. We are told to fear collapse, to dread the possibility that our civilization could fall as theirs did. Yet, if history teaches anything, It is that collapse is not an ending, but a transformation. The knowledge that once lived in stone now lives in circuits. The myths carved into temple walls now flow through digital currents. The form changes, the essence remains. Every generation reclaims the torch from those before it, carrying forward the light of memory even when they do not realize they are doing it. Think about it, everything you are comes from someone who refused to surrender. Each ancestor who hid in a cave, who crossed an ocean, who looked up at a burning sky and still chose to live their choices became your heartbeat. You are the continuation of their defiance, their faith, their unfinished story. You are the bridge between what was lost and what will be rediscovered. When you speak, the world listens. When you act, history shifts. The memory of humanity is not only written in ruins or encoded in genes. It is alive in choice in every act of kindness, every spark of curiosity, every question that refuses to die. That is how the survivors of the old world built the new, and that is how we, the inheritors of their memory, will build what comes next. So, as the world trembles once more between endings and beginnings, remember this: you are not here by chance. You are here because someone, long ago, chose hope over despair. You are the proof that survival is sacred, that even when the earth resets its balance, it carries us with it. And as it turns beneath your feet, quietly, patiently, the planet listens, waiting to see what the next generation of survivors will remember. Night returns to the ruins. The wind drifts through pillars that once reached for the heavens, carrying the same scent of dust and salt that filled the air 10,000 years ago. Above, the stars shimmer, silent, patient, ancient, watching another civilization come to its quiet realization. We are not the first to build, nor the first to fall. Yet in this moment, beneath the same eternal sky, something feels different. We are beginning to remember. Maybe the end was never the end, just the world reminding us to begin again. The great remembering is not a prophecy, it is a pulse. A gentle awareness stirring beneath the noise of modern life, whispering through dreams and headlines, through the ache that comes when you look at the stars too long. It is the return of understanding that was never truly lost, only forgotten beneath layers of progress and fear. The same knowledge that guided the ancients is resurfacing through science, through intuition, through the silent connection we feel when we stand barefoot on the earth. Perhaps the purpose of every cataclysm was not destruction, but awakening. Each time the cycle resets, it strips away what we no longer need, forcing us to rebuild with greater awareness. The flood cleanses, the fire renews, and humanity, though bruised, rises again. We are the outcome of 1,000 forgotten beginnings, each one leaving behind lessons encoded in myth, in memory, in the bones of the earth itself. The great remembering is that moment when all those lessons converge. It begins quietly. A scientist glimpses consciousness in quantum equations and feels awe instead of certainty. A child stares at the ocean and feels the pull of something vast and familiar. Across the world, people sense it, the realization that intelligence is not ours alone, that the planet itself is alive, thinking, dreaming through every tree, every tide, every heartbeat. We call it spirituality, ecology, physics, different names for the same truth. The ancients tried to tell us this through symbols. The serpent devouring its tail, the lotus blooming from mud, the phoenix reborn in fire. They were all reminders that endings and beginnings are one and the same. They understood that memory is the true measure of survival, not the memory of details, but the memory of connection, of belonging to something infinite and kind. And now, standing at the edge of another unknown, we are being asked to remember that again. The great remembering is not about looking backward, but inward. It's the moment when humanity realizes that everything we've sought outside, in gods, in machines, in stars, has always been within. The wisdom of the ancients, the resilience of the survivors, the creativity of the dreamers, all of it lives in us. We are not the lost children of a forgotten civilization. We are its continuation, its proof that consciousness endures beyond ruin. One day, our cities will fade too. The steel will rust, the glass will turn to sand, and the stories of our time will become myths told beneath a different sky. But if we carry the memory, if we pass it through art, kindness, and curiosity, then the next world will not start from zero. It will begin where we left off, wiser, softer, still listening. That is the legacy of every age, to leave behind not monuments, but understanding. So when the world seems uncertain, when the horizon feels heavy with change, remember, the Earth is not ending. It is evolving, and we are part of that evolution. The great remembering is the moment when we finally stop running from the cycle and choose to walk with it when we look at the stars not as distant fires, but as reflections of our own becoming. The wind moves through the ruins again. The stars blink, the ocean breathes, and time folds softly into itself. The story continues, as it always has written, not in words, but in light, in dust, in the hearts of those who remember.